Today, we're going to continue exploring what life was like in ancient Egypt. As you know, this is the second video in a two-part series. In the previous video, we explored topics such as ancient Egyptian society structure, religion, and beliefs. In this video, we're going to go through the military, family, crime and punishment, and some fun. Let's get into it. The military before the Middle Kingdom was made up of regional militias conscripted by regional governors for a specific purpose, usually defense, and then sent to the king. The military was then reformed at the start of the Middle Kingdom by King Amenemhat I to create the first standing army, putting the army directly in his control. After this, the military would then be made up of upper-class leaders and lower-class rank-and-file members. Surprisingly, it was actually possible to advance in the military, and this wasn't affected by one social class. Before the New Kingdom, the military would usually focus on defense. However, some pharaohs such as Thutmose III and Ramesses II later led campaigns beyond Egypt's borders to expand the empire. Egyptians would be very cautious about this and avoided traveling to other lands, as they believed if they died there, it would be harder to reach the afterlife. This was a genuine concern for soldiers, so much so that provisions were made for bodies to be returned to Egypt for burial. There are different views and reports on what it was like to be part of the military. It's been described as some as a life of misery followed by death, while scribes would usually consistently describe the job as the best and most important. I don't know about you, but I'm not believing those scribes. I don't believe them. Now let's discuss what it was like to be part of a family in ancient Egypt. Marriage was viewed as an important affair, but more secular than religious. Marriages would be arranged by parents, with girls married at around 12 years and boys at around 15. Royal children would be betrothed to those of foreign kings to seal treaties when they were little more than infants. Marriage was also encouraged throughout society, and an unmarried man was seen as an incomplete man. Polygamy was also common, with many men having multiple wives. Ancient Egypt had the highest birth rate of the ancient world, with children being considered a blessing sent from the gods. Most married women would spend much of their lives either pregnant or breastfeeding. With little medical advice available, amulets and charms with different figures of gods were used to protect the mother and the unborn child. Mothers would prepare for birth by removing clothing and loosening hair. However, in richer households, the mother may have a specially constructed birthing hut. However, for most of the population, the mother would then squat on birthing bricks for delivery, and the midwife would use a flint knife to cut the umbilical cord. Brutal. Surprisingly, in ancient Egypt, women had almost equal rights to men. They could own businesses, own land, homes, initiate divorce, and enter into contracts with men. At least 4 women even ruled Egypt, with the most famous being Cleopatra VII, although this was not the norm. Royal women also had slaves and servants who cared for the children and tended to the homes, leaving them with less responsibilities on that front. However, they would also assist their husbands in receiving foreign dignitaries and in advancing certain policies. Now for law and order. Egyptian law was swift, nothing like the bureaucracy we have today. After the New Kingdom, there was a police force in Egypt, but before this, suspected criminals would be brought before the local officials and charged with a range of crimes. The state did not involve itself in local affairs unless the crime was directly related to state property or interest, such as maybe robbing or defacing a tomb. The administration of justice would also be pushed far down to the local level as far as possible, with villagers expected to regulate their own affairs. Overall judgment was the responsibility of the king's visors, but they would delegate these to officials beneath them, who would then delegate this further down. Before the New Kingdom, there were administrative buildings in any city called a judgment hall, where cases would be heard and verdicts would be rendered. There were local courts made up of community leaders thought to be of sound moral judgment to hear cases, but then in the New Kingdom, they were replaced with more oracular judgments in which the god Amun would be consulted directly on verdicts. Okay. The priests would then ask an Amun statue questions and then interpret this via various means. Damn. If the accused was found guilty, then judgment was swift. Punishments consisted mainly of fines, but for more serious offences such as robbery, assault, or murder, the accused could be mutilated, put in prison, forced to do labour, or even killed. There were no lawyers to argue a case and no appeals made once a verdict was rendered. The priests were entrusted to give a fair and just hearing and to judge according to the will of the gods, knowing that they faced a far worse fate in the afterlife if they failed in being fair. Damn. To close on a lighter note, ancient Egyptians knew how to have fun and were creative in this pursuit. They participated in games and sports familiar to us today, such as board games, archery, swimming, tug of war, and so on and so forth. They also had festivals for important events such as birthdays of gods, birthdays of individuals, funerals, wakes, and housewarming events. They loved feasting and they loved drinking beer, or if they were more well off, they would enjoy wine. Although their diets were mainly vegetarian, as this was what most could afford, on special occasions for those who were more well off, they could also enjoy meat in their food. And that brings us to the end of this two-part video series on life in ancient Egypt. As always, I hope you've enjoyed your time here and you've learned something new. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please like, subscribe, and comment. And feel free to give us some suggestions for the next video in the comments below. That brings us to the end, and I'll see you again in the next one.